You know, in middle school, I have to admit, I had a reputation that I earned. If there was a fight behind the gym, chances are I was in that fight. Not because I liked fighting, but just simply because I could not walk away when someone challenged me. I mean, there was this kid named Aaron. Aaron was just a bad kid. Aaron, he was a loudmouth. He was quick-tempered. He loved bullying people. I mean, just seemed to enjoy getting a rise out of people. And for some reason, Aaron targeted me. I mean, it seemed like his favorite target. I mean, he would trash talk me, he'd bump me in the hallway. He would do everything to just make my life miserable. And as he would go throughout the day, he would just act like he ran the place. Now, the first time we fought, I told myself that this was about justice. I mean, after all, Aaron was a bully, and somebody had to shut him up. Somebody had to teach him a lesson. But after the second or third time that we fought behind the gym, it wasn't about justice anymore. It had become about my reputation. I mean, I just could not let this guy look like he was better than me. And I don't even remember why we fought. I just remember the moments right before we fought. You know, the tight jaw, the shoulders that were tightening, the clenched fist. I can remember all that. And listen, I can remember I didn't want peace. What I wanted is I wanted to win. I wanted to win at any cost. And every time that we went behind that gym, here's the amazing thing. Every time we went behind that gym, there was always a crowd circling around. And I realized it wasn't about Aaron anymore. It was about proving to that crowd and proving to Aaron and ultimately proving to myself that I was better. I spent a lot of time that year in the principal's office. And I wasn't sorry because I was right. I was strong. At least that's the way I thought. I was so focused, and here's the downside of it. I was so focused on not letting Aaron dominate people that I didn't realize how my anger started dominating me. Now, I wish that I could say that my anger was left behind the gym, but I didn't leave it there. All it did was change clothes. And unfortunately, it followed me into hard conversations and high-stress moments. I mean, I traded fists for sarcasm. I stopped swinging, but I didn't stop sparring. Now it shows up in everyday conversations, especially when I feel misunderstood or even dismissed. And I tend not to listen to understand. I tend to listen to prove a point. Now, I still struggle with wanting to win. I always want to win. I want people to know that I am right. And because of that, I tend to want the last word. I don't want to give up that last word because that last word seems like I'm giving up. And I don't hide it. I'll just say that. I just express it differently. You know, nothing gets me angrier. Nothing gets under my skin faster than watching something get done in the wrong way. I still struggle with the same fight that I had with Aaron. Again, it just shows up dressed in adult language. And the longer that I let it stay under the surface, the more that it starts to dominate me again. Not just my reactions, but it dominates my relationships, it dominates my tone, and it dominates, more importantly, my peace. You know, I believe we've all felt that tension that grows until it finds a way to push back. Maybe it shows up in your marriage. I mean, what started out small, just a small disagreement, has turned into a tug of war between the both of you. And the longer it goes, the less it's about the issue, and the more it's about not giving in. Or maybe it shows up at your workplace. Someone takes credit for something that you did, or they threw you under the bus in a meeting of some sort. And now all you can do is just think about it. I mean, you can't stop rehearsing your comeback, and you replay that moment over and over and over again in your head. And each time you replay it, it's just with a sharper comment, sharper comebacks. You imagine yourself saying what you wished you said when you were in the middle of that meeting, not so that you could be heard, but so that you could make them feel what you felt. Or maybe it's with your parents. I mean, the conversation turns sideways. And even though you know pushing harder is not going to help you, you push anyway. The tension climbs. Every word makes it more difficult, but you keep going. You keep pushing. Your voice gets sharper. Your shoulders get tighter. And even though parts of you wants peace, another part of you, well, it wants to make a point that they won't forget. But we don't just express anger by yelling. Sometimes we express it by staying cold or keeping score or making people earn their way back into our lives. And we just call it boundaries. Maybe it's on social media. Someone posts something. And you know they're wrong. Everybody knows they're wrong. But you start typing anyway. And again, it's not about building bridges. It's about dropping the hammer. You don't care if it damages the relationship. You care that your voice is heard and everybody thinks you're right. Perhaps the struggle, perhaps it isn't external. Perhaps it's internal. You know, the internal war when someone hurts you or disrespects you, and you don't say anything. But inside, you're building a case. You reply and replay the moment over and over and over again. You're writing the script in your head that you'll never say, but you keep it in your mind. Or maybe you've learned to keep your anger quiet. You don't raise your voice. You just withdraw. You punish with silence. You rewrite the story in your head and you call it self-protection. But deep down, it's not just hurt, it's hostility that you have learned how to hide. Can I ask you a question? What's the price tag of being right? What if the need to be right is costing us more than we originally thought? Now, here's the good news. The good news is that the Bible teaches that wrath does not have to write your story because God's grace has already redirected it. Wrath does not have to write your story because God's grace has already redirected it. And I want you to know today that uncontrolled wrath writes tragic stories. Uncontrolled wrath writes tragic stories. And if you don't control your anger will control you. Now, again, the good news is that God does not abandon angry people. And I'm going to show that to you in a moment. In fact, instead of abandoning them, he engages them before they destroy themselves. And in our narrative today, we find a man by the name of Cain. Cain was burning with anger, and God did not strike him down or even turn him away. Instead, God stepped toward him. He gave Cain space to process his rage. He gave Cain space to face his anger honestly and to choose a better path. That's what he did with Cain. And listen, this was not a moment of punishment. It, in fact, was a moment of divine patience. God dignified Cain with a power to choose. And may I say this? Grace always provides a way out before wrath takes over. So, we step into our narrative today where two brothers, they brought an offering to God. On the surface, it looks like worship, but underneath that surface, beneath the surface of all that's going on, something dark is brewing. And that darkness is conflict. Which brings me to this thought. Rejection often brings conflict. Rejection often brings conflict. Cain offers the fruit of the ground, while Abel offers the firstlings of his flock and the fat thereof. The difference, well, it wasn't just in what they brought. I mean, that was obvious. The difference was in why they brought it. Abel's offering flowed from a position of faith. Cain's did not. Let me show it to you in Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews 11 verse 4 says this: by faith, Abel offered a more excellent sacrifice than Cain. Abel gave in faith. Cain gave out of obligation. Abel brought a sacrifice of worship. Cain, well, he brought a symbol without surrender. And God, well, he saw the difference. Notice in our narrative in Genesis chapter 4 and verse 5, Genesis 4 verse 5 says this: but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect, and Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. I want you to underline in that passage, not respect, and then underline wrath. Underline not respect and underline the word wrath. We find in this passage that Cain is enraged. He's not just disappointed, he is angry. The word wrath here means blazing with anger. This is the kind of wrath that it doesn't just simmer quietly. In fact, it shows up on your face. It burns with resentment. And Cain was burning with resentment both toward his brother Abel and also toward God. And that's where hope steps in. Though Cain was very angry, God gives Cain a chance to calm down. Which brings me to this thought. God often invites resolution. God often invites resolution. At this moment, God does not scold Cain. In fact, he probes him. God's first move is not punishment. We tend to think that, but God's first move is not punishment, but it is confrontational. And he invites Cain to take an honest look at what is happening in his heart. Notice in verse number 6, Genesis 4 verse 6 says this: and the Lord said unto Cain, why art thou wroth? And why is thy countenance fallen? You know, the same God who questioned Adam when he fell is now questioning Cain before he falls any further. God is always a God of second chances. When we have missed the mark, God reminds us and God invites us to make it right. And that's exactly what God is doing here with Cain. Cain missed the mark, and God is giving him the opportunity to correct his course. Look at verse number 7. Genesis 4 verse 7 says this. God's speaking here. He says, if thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? That's what God says to Cain. You know, this is grace. God's rejection of Cain's offering is not the end of the story. God is giving Cain the opportunity to correct himself. When you and I come face to face with anger, God often reminds us that we can turn things around. We don't need to keep going down this path of wrath. So as God tells Cain that he can make things right, and what he does will be accepted if he does it right, God also gives Cain a warning. He gives Cain the warning of what will happen if he does not turn things around. Which brings me to this thought. Our anger often opens the door to sin. Our anger often opens the door to sin. God not only invites Cain to turn things around, he also warns Cain of the consequences of hanging on to his anger. Cain's struggle is our struggle. When we feel that we have been wronged, we want vindication. God sees our anger, and then he warns of tragedy. God warns Cain in this passage. God warns Cain that if he does not deal with his anger, then something far more dangerous is coming. Look again. Let's continue in verse number 7. Genesis 4:7 says this. Again, if thou doest well, or not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. Sin here is pictured as a wild animal. It's crouching outside the door. It's waiting. It's watching. It's getting ready to pounce. Listen, this is not passive temptation. This is a predator. And if Cain lets his anger linger, then sin will take over. God isn't just warning Cain. God also is empowering Cain. And God is telling Cain, master your anger, or your anger will master you. And the warning still stands today. Sin does not knock politely. It stalks. And if we don't get control of it, if we don't take control of the situation, it will control us, just as it did me back in middle school. Paul gives the same warning in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 26 when he says this. Ephesians 4:26 says, "Be ye angry and sin not." In other words, anger itself is not sin, but anger does put us in dangerous territory to sin. So Paul's telling us, be cautious. When anger comes in, be very cautious that you do not allow it to slip into sin. You see, anger often leads to regrets. And if we're not careful, anger will become our master. It will rule us. It will lead us to places that we never wanted to go. It will cause us to do things that we never wanted to happen. And it will cause us to regret decisions that we never wanted to act on. And that's why the Apostle Paul tells us in Romans chapter 12 and verse 21. Romans 12:21 says this, "Be not overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good." In our narrative, the responsibility rests with Cain. He must master his anger, or his anger will master him. Cain must make the decision to do good. And in this case, good is bring another offering with the correct spirit. When we face anger, suppressing it, that's not the correct option. We must do something with it. We must master our anger, and here's how we do it, by responding with grace. Which brings me to this thought. The cure for anger begins with confession. The cure for anger begins with confession. When we find ourselves angry, the natural response is to embrace it or excuse it. But God calls us to identify it and to confess it. Confession is where the cure begins. It brings our anger into the light, and it places it before the one who can deal with our anger. If we embrace our anger, we feed it. If we confess our anger, we position ourselves to overcome it. And so God confronts Cain in a very pastoral tone. He says this in Genesis 4, verse 9. Genesis 4:9 says, "And the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother?" Now listen, God already knew the answer. But God once again gave Cain a chance to confess. Now this wasn't a moment of rage from God. It was another window of mercy. But Cain chose deflection over confession. If you and I, listen, if you're not familiar with this story, Cain became angry with God because God did not accept his offering, but he accepted Abel's. So out of jealousy, Cain killed Abel. So God once again comes to Cain in a very pastoral fashion, and God just simply gives Cain another opportunity to confess and to make things right. But that's not what Cain did. It's not what he chose. Cain, in fact, chose to lie, which brings me to a thought. Deception only makes matters worse. Deception only makes matters worse. The natural response to any interrogation is to protect our reputation. If an accusation sounds like it would incriminate us, we naturally want to reject the accusation, and our instinct is to lie. Cain had a moment to confess, a window of grace, but instead of owning what he had done, he lied. He deflected. He dodged the truth. And that's what we see in Genesis chapter 4:9. Let's look there. Genesis 4:9 says, "And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper?" Do you hear the lie and the deflection? Now listen, God had not yet pronounced judgment. Cain still had an opportunity to come clean, but Cain chose self-preservation over reconciliation. And that's the power of deception. Deception keeps us stuck in sin, making us defend it. I mean, what could have been a story of healing ultimately became the story of the first murder. Which brings me to another thought. Every time we hide our sin, we step deeper into its trap. Every time we hide our sin, we step deeper into its trap. Our anger leads to destruction, but Christ, here's the good news, Christ took the full weight of that destruction upon himself. The cross is where wrath ends and grace begins. And it's the cross that gives us the power to master what would otherwise master us. Cain had the opportunity to resolve his anger before his anger ruined him. He chose instead to let his anger linger. It festered. And when Cain refused every opportunity that God had given him, judgment came. Cain was not just angry now. Cain was now guilty. And God, who had been patient, pronounced a curse upon Cain, a personal curse upon Cain. And that curse was that the ground would no longer yield for Cain. His work became fruitless and his life became restless. May I just say this? God is rich in mercy, but, and don't forget this, God is also righteous in judgment. Grace is never forced. And when it is rejected, we are left with dealing the full weight of God's wrath. The full weight of our choices. And that's what happened to Cain. The ground no longer would respond to Cain. And may I say this? Unresolved anger does not stay buried. It just doesn't. Anger is something that continues under the surface of our emotions if we don't care for it properly. Too often, we have seen the results of unresolved anger become stories of tragedy. It lies under the surface until it grows into a monster that we struggle to control. It becomes something that must find a place of escape. And so it does, resulting in ruined relationships and wrecked reputations. We must deal with anger when it first shows up in our lives. The writer of Hebrews talks about this in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse number 15. Hebrews 12:15 says this, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. Unresolved wrath does not stay buried. It grows, and when it grows, it spreads. By the way, anger is something that it just doesn't affect the one with anger. Anger has victims. And when we allow that monster of anger to rise, it destroys lives. It destroys our lives, and it destroys the lives of those who receive our anger. And that is why Paul gives us a tactic to master our anger. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26 says this. Ephesians 4:26 says, let not the sun go down upon your wrath. See, when you begin to feel the monster of anger rising inside of you, that's the time to deal with it. We should never let anger fester. We should never let that bitterness grow. We must make the right choices quickly to avoid disastrous tragedies. We must allow God's grace to intervene. We must turn revenge into reconciliation. And the only way to break free from the cycle of wrath is by choosing grace. We must choose the grace that God extends to us. Then we must choose to extend that same grace to others. That's why Paul tells us what to do about it in Ephesians 4:32. Let's look at it. Ephesians 4:32 says this, and be ye kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. You see, reconciliation begins when we extend the same grace that God gave us. It begins when we extend it to others. When we find ourselves in the wrong for being angry, God extends grace to us so that we can make things right. And so then when we find ourselves wronged by others, God's grace can be extended through us. The path forward is not retaliation, but forgiveness. And God makes that possible through the cross. True healing comes when grace replaces grudges. So the next time that conflict rises, don't let wrath write the script. Instead, invite God's grace to redirect the story. Maybe for you, anger has become a familiar companion. I mean, it's with you everywhere you go. It rises when you feel dismissed at work. But what really stings is feeling invisible. It flares up in your marriage. It's not just because of harsh words, but because you never really feel truly heard. It simmers when someone else gets what you've been praying for, and you quietly wonder if God is playing favorites. It shows up when you've held everything together for so long for everyone, and no one seems to notice. Now, you wouldn't call it wrath, but it is writing your story. And the longer anger lingers, the more it reshapes you. The longer anger lingers, the more it reshapes how you see yourself and how you see others. Anger is not just something that you feel. It becomes something that you carry. And over time, you stop noticing how heavy it is. Perhaps your anger is not explosive outburst, but it is internal narratives that quietly build. I mean, you say things like, well, they always do that. Or you say things like, I'll never trust them again. That quiet simmer of resentment, it's still wrath. It's just with a calmer face. Maybe part of you doesn't want to let go of your anger. I've run into people like that all the time. They just don't want to let go of their anger. I mean, you've carried it for so long, and it feels like if you let it go, then it's not protecting you. It feels like that if you release it, then who will speak for the part of you that was hurt? May I just say this? Forgiveness sounds like pretending it didn't matter. I get that. It sounds like letting go, feels like letting them off the hook. But anger never protects. In fact, it isolates, it drains, and it always costs more than it gives. Or maybe the struggle isn't with others. Maybe it's internal. I mean, you're angry at God, or you're angry at yourself. Maybe you're just angry at circumstances beyond your control, and you feel that it's unfair. Instead of bringing that anger to God, you've chosen to suppress it, to justify it, and you've let it harden you. Could you make just one different choice this week when anger rises? Maybe you could pause long enough to name what you're really feeling. Maybe you could just ask, why am I angry? I mean, that's the question that God asked Cain. And it's still the question that makes space for grace today. Maybe for you, it looks like choosing silence instead of sarcasm, or prayer instead of passive aggression, or confession instead of withdrawal. You're not doing this to prove something. You're doing it because grace, well, it makes a different ending possible. Perhaps you need to confess the anger that you've been nursing. It doesn't matter if it's been an hour or years. Confession is not weakness. Confession is how God invites grace to rewrite the ending. I'd like for you to take a moment to think about your story, your anger, and how it's writing your narrative. I mean, what story could grace begin to tell instead? Again, grace does not erase your pain or excuse what happened, but it can interrupt your bitterness. It can stop the cycle before it becomes your story. And every time you choose grace over wrath, you hand God the pen to rewrite a better story. I'd like for you to imagine the stories that God could write in our lives if we simply chose grace over wrath. I mean, what if the next time tension rises, we didn't rush to defend ourselves, but instead we paused to allow God to write a story that's bigger than we could imagine? I mean, what if instead of fueling the fire of confrontation or of frustration, we open the door for reconciliation? I mean, what could happen if in our homes if we responded to conflict, not with shouting or slamming doors or silent treatments, but with words that are soft? They soften the hearts and they keep them open. I mean, what if our children saw our owning our anger instead of justifying it? What if spouses stopped keeping score and started fighting for connection instead of control? What would it look like if grace became our default response, not our last resort? What if every family in our church made a decision this week that they would not be a house where wrath rules, but instead chose to be a house where grace wins? I mean, how would that reshape our homes? How many generational wounds could begin to heal if we stopped passing down resentment and started modeling reconciliation? Picture with me today the kind of witness that we would be to our community. You know, in a culture steeped in outrage and offense, what if our church was known for being a people who were slow to anger and quick to forgive? I mean, what if our lives told a different story, a better story, simply because we chose God's grace again and again and again? May I challenge us? Let's be a people who live like grace has the final word. Because when we let grace write the story, we don't just avoid tragedy, we step into redemption. And that is the story that the world needs to read. So I want to challenge you to take a next step. Would you be willing to memorize our theme verse for this series, Galatians chapter 5, verses 16 through 17? If so, check the box on your connection card. Maybe today you realize that your sin, and especially maybe anger, has caused you to be separated from God. And you realize that if you don't get it right, if you don't confess it before your God, if you don't choose Jesus, then you will have to take the full weight of God's wrath for your sin. And so you've realized today that you need to become a follower of Jesus. And if that's the case, let me encourage you to check the box on your connection card. Become a follower of Jesus. Maybe today, as you deal with your anger, you're ready to confess your anger to God today. You're just going to identify, I am angry, and then name what you're angry at. Name why you're angry. Name what you're angry for, whatever. But name the anger today. Name it to God. Tell God all about it. Maybe as you deal with your anger today, you're willing to choose today to forgive that person that doesn't deserve forgiveness. You're ready to do that. Maybe as you deal with your anger today, you're ready to choose to extend grace this week to everyone who offends you. You're going to make the decision now. So when it comes, the decision's already made. You're going to choose to extend grace to everyone that offends you this week. Whatever decision you're ready to make, would you check the box on your connection card? Our music team is here to sing for us. I'm going to pray before they do. And after I pray, they're going to sing. And that's the time for you to go ahead and check those boxes on your connection card. Let's pray. Father, thank you again for allowing us to just look at your word. And I pray that you will help us to choose grace every time anger rises, so that we can defeat this monster that rises so often in our lives. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.